The galaxy had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations, yet nothing had ever prepared it for the message that arrived from a single blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. It came without warning. No grand fleet announced its arrival. No ancient artifact unlocked its secrets. One moment, the endless communication lattice that stretched across millions of light-years hummed with the routine chatter of commerce, diplomacy, and conquest. The next, every channel fell silent. Every transmission stopped. Every sensor froze. Across distant colonies, bustling orbital stations, and warships drifting between stars, billions of beings looked toward their consoles as a single encrypted signal overrode every frequency in existence. It carried only one unmistakable origin. Earth. Inside the colossal chambers of the Galactic Council, silence had always been a symbol of authority. The chamber itself floated above a black artificial singularity, its polished obsidian platform suspended in perfect balance around a glowing sphere that projected the entire known galaxy. Thousands of representatives watched from towering terraces carved into crystal walls that shimmered with ancient energy. These were rulers whose species had survived for millions of years. Some had witnessed stars ignite. Others had rewritten the destinies of entire civilizations with nothing more than a unanimous vote. They believed history belonged to them because, for longer than memory itself, it always had. The Council did not negotiate with young species. It evaluated them. It measured their usefulness. And when necessary, it erased them. Entire solar systems had disappeared after refusing Council authority. The official records called these disappearances stabilization events. Survivors called them extinction. Every intelligent civilization understood the unwritten law of the galaxy, challenged the Council, and your name would vanish from history as though you had never existed. Fear was not merely an emotion anymore. It had become the foundation upon which galactic peace had been built. So when Earth's signal appeared, many assumed it was a plea for mercy. Others expected surrender. A few laughed quietly, amused that such a young civilization believed it deserved the Council's attention. The transmission began without music, without ceremony, and without translation algorithms struggling to interpret human speech. Somehow, impossibly, every species heard the words in its own native language. The voice was calm. Measured. Almost unsettling in its confidence. We know who you are. A ripple of confusion swept across the chamber. We know what you've done. The holographic galaxy flickered. Representatives exchanged uneasy glances for the first time in centuries. And we know exactly why you believe no one can stop you. The words were not shouted. They carried no anger. Yet somehow they struck harder than any declaration of war ever recorded. It was the tone of someone who had already made their decision long before speaking. Across the galaxy, military commanders ordered emergency scans. Intelligence networks searched desperately for hidden fleets. Ancient defense arrays awakened after lying dormant for thousands of years. Yet every report returned the same impossible conclusion. Earth possessed no force capable of threatening the Galactic Council. Not even close. Which made the confidence behind the transmission infinitely more terrifying. Within the council chamber, several elder delegates dismissed the message as primitive arrogance. One ancient ruler leaned forward with a smile that had witnessed empires crumble before his own civilization learned agriculture. Another child demanding respect, he whispered. Others nodded. After all, humanity had existed for barely the blink of an eye compared to the civilization surrounding them. Their cities were young. Their technology immature. Their history stained with wars against themselves. Compared to the immortal powers of the galaxy, Earth was insignificant. Or so the Council believed. They had studied humanity's weapons. They had mapped Earth's defenses. They had infiltrated human communications. They believed they understood everything worth knowing about the species that called itself human. But there was one thing no database could measure. No sensor could detect it. No equation could predict it. The terrifying determination of a civilization that had spent its entire existence surviving impossible odds. As the final seconds of the transmission echoed through the chamber, the silence returned. Not the silence of authority. Not the silence of confidence. This was different. It was the silence that comes just before history changes forever. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, humanity had already made its first move. Captain Elena Hayes stood motionless on the command deck of the UNS Resolute, her eyes fixed on the endless ocean of stars stretching beyond the reinforced observation glass. Space here felt different. It was quieter than silence itself, a place so distant from Earth that even the light of humanity's home star had long disappeared into memory. Before the Resolute drifted the boundary marked on every galactic map as the Council frontier, a region where no independent civilization had ever crossed without permission. Beyond it lay the heart of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years, its influence reaching farther than imagination and older than recorded history. Every officer aboard the flagship understood what that invisible border truly represented. It was not merely the edge of territory. It was the edge of fear. The Resolute itself was unlike any vessel the Galactic Council had ever encountered. Its sleek titanium black hull reflected the surrounding nebulae like liquid glass, while thousands of microscopic adaptive panels constantly shifted to absorb radiation, repair microscopic damage, and redirect hostile sensor scans. Beneath the armor, quantum fusion cores pulsed with restrained energy powerful enough to move a floating city between stars. The ship did not roar through space like ancient battleships of old. It glided with eerie precision, almost as though the vacuum welcomed its passage. Every vibration beneath the crew's feet reminded them they were standing inside humanity's greatest achievement, not simply a weapon, but proof that a civilization born on one fragile world had learned to challenge the impossible. Around the flagship floated the rest of Earth's expeditionary fleet. Hundreds of cruisers, carriers, destroyers, and escort frigates maintained perfect formation without a single unnecessary transmission. Blue navigation lights shimmered softly against the darkness, creating the illusion of a constellation moving with deliberate purpose. It was not the largest armada ever assembled. Compared to the endless fleets of the Galactic Council, it was almost insignificant. Yet every vessel represented decades of cooperation between nations that had once been bitter rivals. Engineers from every continent had built them. Scientists had shared discoveries once guarded as national secrets. Generations had sacrificed comfort so humanity could stand united beneath one banner when the moment finally arrived. Strength had not come from conquest. It had come from choosing unity over division. Elena slowly walked toward the center of the bridge as holographic displays awakened around her. Three-dimensional star maps rotated in the air, highlighting gravitational anomalies, hyperspace corridors, and ancient council installations hidden inside glowing nebulae. Massive ring-shaped gateways drifted silently in the distance, their metallic surfaces covered with symbols so old that no known species could fully translate them. Some were larger than moons, remnants of forgotten civilizations whose names had vanished before humanity had even discovered fire. Beyond them floated shattered planets split cleanly in half, frozen monuments to wars that had ended millions of years ago. Every sight beyond the viewport reminded the crew of one undeniable truth. The galaxy was beautiful, but it carried scars older than civilization itself. Long-range scans complete, Commander Malik announced, his voice barely louder than a whisper. No confirmed hostile movement, but we're being watched. Nobody questioned his conclusion. Invisible surveillance satellites drifted behind asteroids. Unknown sensor beams brushed against the fleet like unseen fingers. Somewhere beyond detectable range, Council observers were almost certainly recording every movement, every engine pulse, every encrypted communication. Humanity had crossed into territory where every decision would be judged by civilizations that considered Earth little more than an ambitious child. The bridge remained calm, but beneath that discipline lived quiet anticipation. Some officers thought about families waiting on Earth. Others remembered classmates who had never lived long enough to witness humanity reaching the stars. No one spoke those thoughts aloud. They didn't need to. Elena rested her hand against the command console and allowed herself one slow breath. She remembered standing beneath Earth's night sky as a little girl, wondering whether anyone else existed among the stars. Back then, first contact had seemed like humanity's greatest dream. Reality had proven far more complicated. The galaxy was not waiting to welcome newcomers. It was already ruled by powers that believed history belonged exclusively to them. Yet despite everything she had learned, despite every intelligence report warning that the Council viewed humanity as insignificant, she felt no regret. Fear was natural. Doubt was inevitable. But neither could determine the future. Ahead, the stars shimmered as distant gravitational distortions rippled across the darkness. The Council's territory had begun. And somewhere beyond those ancient worlds, an empire that believed it owned the galaxy was about to meet the one civilization that refused to ask permission to stand among the stars. The first warning came without sound. Every display aboard the UNS Resolute flickered for less than a second before stabilizing again, but every trained officer on the bridge recognized the anomaly instantly. Space itself was changing. Far beyond visual range, invisible gravitational waves rippled across the void like stones dropped into an endless black ocean. Navigation beacons vanished one by one. Long-range sensors returned impossible readings. Then, as if the stars themselves were pulling apart to reveal something hidden behind reality, hundreds of crimson fractures ignited across the darkness. Hyperspace was opening. Not in one location. Not in 10. Everywhere. Multiple emergence signatures, Commander Malik reported, his voice steady despite the numbers racing across his console. Correction, thousands. The bridge fell silent. Captain Elena Hayes stepped toward the forward viewport just as the first Council warship emerged from the glowing rift. It was immense beyond comprehension, its obsidian hull stretching for dozens of kilometers, illuminated by rivers of molten blue energy flowing beneath armored plating older than human civilization itself. Then another appeared beside it. And another. Within seconds the emptiness ahead transformed into an endless wall of black steel. Battleships. Carriers. Planetary siege platforms. Automated drone swarms. They continued arriving until the stars behind them disappeared completely, swallowed by a fleet so enormous it resembled a second galaxy suspended in the void. Several younger officers instinctively stopped breathing. No simulation had prepared them for this. Every intelligence estimate had been wrong. Humanity had expected overwhelming force. Instead, they faced something that bordered on the impossible. Across every human vessel, emergency alert systems activated simultaneously. Pilots sprinted toward interceptor hangars. Damage control teams sealed internal blast doors. Medical bays filled with volunteers preparing for casualties that had not yet occurred. Families back on Earth would never hear these alarms. They would never witness the quiet determination spreading across the fleet as thousands of men and women accepted that they might never return home. Then the transmission arrived. It did not merely enter human communications. It dominated them. Every speaker aboard every ship echoed with the same impossibly calm voice, ancient and utterly devoid of emotion. Civilization designation, Earth. A brief pause followed, long enough to let the silence become unbearable. You have entered sovereign territory belonging to the Galactic Council. The holographic star map shifted instantly. Bright red targeting symbols spread across nearby systems, extending farther and farther until they reached one familiar point far behind the fleet. Earth. Officers stared in disbelief as impossible calculations unfolded before them. The Council already possessed firing solutions. Planetary annihilation weapons had locked onto humanity's homeworld from distances measured in thousands of light-years. There would be no warning. No evacuation. No second chance. The ancient voice continued. Your species will submit unconditionally. Its tone never changed. It never needed to. Refusal will result in the complete sterilization of Sol system. Human civilization will be removed from galactic history. Silence swallowed the bridge. No one moved. No one spoke. For a single endless moment, every soul aboard the Resolute imagined the same terrible image, Earth disappearing beneath oceans of fire. The blue skies. The mountains. The cities. Every memory humanity had ever created reduced to drifting ash among the stars. Lieutenant Naomi Chen quietly closed her eyes. Her parents still lived in Vancouver. Commander Malik thought of his daughter, who had celebrated her 8th birthday only 3 days before departure. Even Elena's disciplined expression faltered for the briefest instant as memories flooded her mind, the smell of rain after a summer storm, children laughing beneath open skies, the sound of ocean waves striking Earth's shores. Everything they loved. Balanced upon a single decision. Fear spread through the bridge like invisible ice, settling into every heartbeat. Yet beneath that fear, something unexpected began to awaken. Not panic. Not surrender. Resolve. Human history had never been gentle. Humanity had survived extinction events before there were cities, crossed frozen continents with nothing but determination, endured pandemics, wars, famine, and disasters that should have ended civilization 100 times over. Every generation inherited impossible odds, and somehow refused to disappear. Captain Elena Hayes slowly straightened her shoulders. She looked across the faces of her crew. No tears. No pleas. Only quiet determination. The Galactic Council believed fear was the strongest force in the universe. They believed threatening Earth would force humanity to kneel like every civilization before them. But as the endless enemy fleet waited for surrender, the Council failed to recognize the dangerous silence spreading across every human ship. It was the silence of a species that had stopped asking whether it could survive, and started deciding how it would fight. The Galactic Council waited for humanity's surrender. Seconds stretched into a full minute, then another. Across the endless armada of ancient warships, targeting arrays remained locked on the Sol system, while commanders silently counted down to the moment Earth would finally yield. They had witnessed this ritual thousands of times before. Every civilization, regardless of its courage, eventually reached the same conclusion. Survival demanded obedience. Fear always prevailed. Yet inside the Council's command chamber, subtle signs of uncertainty began to appear. Human ships were not retreating. Their weapons had not powered down. More strangely still, Earth's communication network had gone completely dark. No diplomatic channels. No distress signals. No negotiations. It was as if humanity had simply vanished. Then, deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, hidden nearly 12 kilometers below crushing pressure, an installation that officially did not exist awakened for the first time in 73 years. Rows of dormant quantum reactors ignited in perfect sequence. Entire mountain-sized chambers filled with blinding blue light. Artificial intelligences, isolated from every known network since their creation, activated simultaneously and exchanged information faster than light itself. Across the moon, sealed beneath kilometers of ancient basalt inside the Shackleton crater, another facility responded. Vast quantum cores hummed to life, awakening thousands of autonomous systems that had patiently waited through decades of silence. Farther still, scattered among forgotten asteroid colonies beyond Mars, hundreds of concealed relay stations emerged from power-saving hibernation. Individually they meant nothing. Together, they formed something no alien civilization had ever imagined. Project Aegis. Humanity's final contingency. Not a superweapon. Not a fleet. A living network. Captain Elena Hayes watched as her tactical display transformed before her eyes. Green icons representing human vessels suddenly connected through shimmering lines of blue light, stretching across millions of kilometers until every ship became part of one immense intelligence. Every radar scan, every sensor reading, every engine adjustment, every tactical calculation merged into a single consciousness operating at impossible speed. No captain issued commands anymore. No delay existed between observation and action. Humanity itself had become the battlefield. Commander Malik stared at the impossible data flowing across his console. "Captain," he whispered. "The fleet isn't communicating." He paused. "It's thinking." At that exact moment, the Council opened fire. Thousands of planet-killer missiles erupted from launch platforms the size of moons, their engines burning with enough energy to outshine nearby stars. Waves of plasma lances and antimatter projectors illuminated the darkness as ancient warships unleashed destruction on a scale no living human had ever witnessed. The void itself seemed to tear apart beneath the barrage. Then the impossible happened. Every missile abruptly changed course. Without exploding. Without warning. Entire volleys rotated in perfect synchronization and accelerated directly back toward the fleets that had launched them. Council commanders shouted conflicting orders. Navigation systems refused to respond. Weapons ignored firing commands. Shield generators shut themselves down one after another as unfamiliar code spread through military networks older than most civilizations. Across hundreds of ships, control panels displayed the same unfamiliar symbol, a simple blue circle surrounding Earth's smallest star. The Council had spent millions of years perfecting stronger weapons. Humanity had spent decades mastering adaptation. Project Aegis was never designed to overpower the galaxy. It was designed to understand it. Every Council transmission. Every energy signature. Every defensive algorithm secretly observed during decades of cautious exploration had been quietly catalogued, analyzed, and transformed into knowledge. Human scientists had accepted one uncomfortable truth long ago: they could never build larger fleets than the Council. They could never match millions of years of industrial power. So they chose a different battlefield. Information. Learning. Evolution. The living quantum network rewrote targeting systems before enemy commanders even realized they had been breached. Artificial intelligences adapted faster than alien software could defend itself. Every second made humanity stronger while the Council grew blinder, slower, and increasingly helpless against an enemy they could no longer predict. Across the battlefield, colossal dreadnoughts drifted powerless. Planetary siege cannons shut down in silence. Entire formations lost the ability to distinguish friend from foe as tactical networks collapsed into chaos. For the first time since the Galactic Council had united the stars. Its empire no longer controlled the battlefield. Inside the Council chamber, ancient rulers stared in disbelief as centuries of unquestioned superiority unraveled in minutes. They had believed humanity possessed primitive technology, limited industry, and insignificant military strength. They had measured Earth's ships, its weapons, its population. But they had overlooked the one advantage that had defined humanity since the beginning of its history. When confronted by an impossible enemy, humans did not become stronger than their opponents. They became smarter than the problem itself. And in that single realization, the oldest empire in the galaxy understood it had just made the greatest mistake in its existence. Captain Elena Hayes never raised her voice. She simply looked across the command deck of the UNS Resolute, where every officer stood frozen between disbelief and determination, and spoke a single word that echoed through the living quantum network linking every human ship in existence. Advance. The command did not travel through radio waves or encrypted transmissions. It rippled instantly across Project Aegis, reaching every captain, every pilot, every autonomous drone, and every combat system at the exact same moment. Hundreds of human warships surged forward as one, their fusion drives igniting in brilliant streams of sapphire light that carved glowing paths through the darkness. Against the backdrop of the immobilized Council armada, the advancing fleet resembled a river of living stars flowing toward a mountain that had suddenly forgotten how to stand. The battlefield erupted. Human interceptor squadrons launched from carrier bays in perfect synchronization, accelerating so rapidly that streaks of blue plasma lingered behind them like brushstrokes across the void. Swarms of autonomous drones darted ahead, weaving effortlessly between drifting enemy vessels whose defensive targeting systems could no longer distinguish friend from foe. Massive rail cannons aboard Earth's cruisers thundered silently through space, hurling dense tungsten projectiles at relativistic speeds. One by one, colossal Council dreadnoughts fractured under the impact, their once impenetrable armor splitting apart in glowing rivers of molten metal. The explosions illuminated nearby nebulae, turning clouds of cosmic dust into oceans of crimson and gold. Yet humanity did not advance like conquerors intoxicated by victory. They advanced with discipline. With purpose. Every tactical decision made by Project Aegis prioritized disabling rather than annihilating. Precision strikes severed propulsion systems instead of life support cores. Electromagnetic pulses shut down weapons without venting entire crews into the vacuum of space. Boarding craft slipped through shattered shield grids, carrying soldiers trained not only for combat but also for rescue. Wherever possible, escape corridors remained open. Medical drones crossed battle lines to recover wounded beings regardless of the uniform they wore. Some Council officers stared in utter confusion. Mercy had never been part of galactic warfare. Inside one crippled alien flagship, Supreme Marshal Karen struggled to comprehend the tactical reports flooding his collapsing command center. Every prediction generated by the Council's strategic intelligence had failed. Humanity possessed the advantage. Humanity possessed the initiative. Humanity could erase the Council's leadership with a single coordinated strike. Instead, they kept offering opportunities to surrender. He watched through his observation dome as human marines entered the vessel. Their weapons remained raised, but none fired unnecessarily. One soldier even pulled an injured Council technician away from sparking machinery before continuing deeper into the ship. Karen had conquered dozens of civilizations during his centuries of command. Not one had ever shown compassion after gaining victory. At that moment, he realized why humanity was winning. They were not fighting for domination. They were fighting for something far more dangerous. A future. Across the battlefield, the momentum became unstoppable. Human destroyers threaded impossible paths through collapsing debris fields, while coordinated drone formations dismantled enormous siege platforms piece by piece. The once perfect Council formations dissolved into isolated pockets of confusion. Ancient admirals shouted contradictory commands as communication networks continued to fail under the relentless adaptation of Project Aegis. Ships that had survived thousands of years of warfare drifted helplessly, surrounded by a civilization younger than many of their own cities. Captain Hayes watched the tactical display slowly change color. Red icons, one after another, turned blue. Not because they had been destroyed. Because they had surrendered. Throughout the fleet, cheers threatened to erupt, but discipline held them in check. Every officer understood the price already paid. Burning human ships floated among the wreckage, silent reminders that victory had demanded sacrifice. Rescue vessels immediately broke formation, racing toward escape pods and damaged craft. No celebration could begin while even one life remained in danger. Then, at the center of the battlefield, the impossible happened. The Council's colossal command flagship, an immense fortress that had directed galactic wars for nearly 2 million years, deactivated its weapons. Its shields faded. Its engines shut down. One by one, ceremonial lights illuminated across its vast hull. The universal signal for unconditional surrender. Across thousands of star systems, billions watched the live transmission in stunned silence. The oldest empire in recorded history. An empire that had never bowed before anyone. had surrendered to the youngest civilization in the galaxy. Not because humanity possessed the largest fleet. Not because it wielded the most powerful weapons. But because it had proven something the Council had forgotten long ago. True strength was never measured by the power to make others kneel. It was measured by the courage to stand together, even when the entire galaxy expected you to fall. When the last weapon fell silent, the galaxy seemed to exhale for the first time in millions of years. The violent flashes of battle slowly faded into distant embers drifting through the endless darkness, while shattered fragments of warships glimmered like frozen constellations scattered across the battlefield. Rescue craft moved quietly between fields of debris, their navigation lights cutting gentle paths through clouds of cooling plasma. Gone were the thunderous exchanges of fire and the terrifying alarms that had filled every communication channel only moments before. In their place came something almost forgotten by the civilizations of the galaxy. Peace. Not the peace imposed by fear or overwhelming force, but the fragile silence earned through unimaginable sacrifice. Captain Elena Hayes stood alone aboard the observation deck of the UNS Resolute, watching stars emerge once more from behind the drifting wreckage. Her reflection stared back from the reinforced glass, marked by exhaustion rather than triumph. Around her, crews worked tirelessly to recover survivors from both sides of the conflict. Human medics treated alien soldiers without hesitation. Engineers stabilized crippled Council vessels before their damaged reactors could explode. Throughout the fleet, no one spoke of revenge. Too many friends had been lost. Too many names would never answer another roll call. Victory carried a weight far heavier than celebration. Elena quietly closed her eyes, remembering every face that had boarded the Resolute believing they might never see home again. Some never would. Across thousands of inhabited worlds, the live broadcast spread faster than light itself. Citizens who had spent entire lifetimes fearing the Galactic Council gathered in city squares, orbital habitats, underground colonies, and distant frontier settlements to witness the impossible. They watched ancient Council warships lower their weapons. They watched human rescue teams pull alien survivors from burning wreckage. They watched an empire that had ruled through unquestioned authority accept defeat without another shot being fired. Entire civilizations that had hidden for centuries began emerging from isolation. Independent worlds reopened long-abandoned trade routes. Border stations switched off planetary defense grids that had remained active for generations. For the first time in living memory, hope traveled more quickly than fear. Then Earth's transmission reached every corner of known space. There were no military parades. No declarations of conquest. No demands for tribute or allegiance. The image that appeared on billions of screens showed only the blue curve of Earth rising above the darkness of space, peaceful and unscarred despite everything that had nearly happened. Captain Elena Hayes stepped into view, her uniform bearing the marks of battle but her voice calm and unwavering. The galaxy does not belong to Earth. She paused, allowing the words to settle. It never belonged to the Galactic Council. Another quiet breath. It belongs to every civilization willing to protect life instead of controlling it. No threats followed. No conditions. Only an invitation. A promise that every species, large or small, ancient or newly arrived among the stars, would stand as equals beneath a future no empire could own again. The message echoed across worlds that had forgotten what equality sounded like. Years passed, and history slowly rebuilt itself around that single moment. The mighty council transformed from an empire into an alliance of sovereign civilizations. Ancient borders dissolved, replaced by cooperative exploration missions reaching beyond the edges of known space. Human engineers worked alongside former rivals to restore shattered planets scarred by centuries of war. Universities welcomed students from species that had once viewed one another as mortal enemies. Children grew up hearing stories not of the day humanity conquered the galaxy, but of the day humanity refused to. On Earth, monuments were raised not to celebrate victory, but to remember sacrifice. The names of every fallen pilot, engineer, medic, scientist, and sailor were carved into walls of polished stone beneath open skies. Visitors from countless worlds stood before those memorials in respectful silence, realizing that the freedom they now shared had been purchased by people who had asked for nothing in return. Long after Captain Elena Hayes was gone, long after the UNS Resolute had become a museum drifting peacefully in Earth orbit, travelers crossing the stars would still tell the same story. They would speak of the oldest empire that believed the galaxy belonged to them. They would speak of one small blue planet that dared to disagree. And they would remember that civilizations are not remembered because they ruled with fear. They are remembered because, when history demanded a choice between power and hope, they chose hope. And in doing so, humanity did far more than win a war. It reminded the entire galaxy what it truly meant to be free.